All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Hello and welcome to Funding Your Dance Archives Projects, presented by Dance USA. My name is Crystal Collins, and I am the Leadership and Learning Specialist at Dance USA. I use they and she pronouns. I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Lenape people, known as Brooklyn, New York. And I am a brown-skinned, non-binary person wearing a cream-colored sweater, my hair up in a clip, and let me see what lip color I have on, in a pinky nude lip color. I am so excited to welcome you all this evening to this practical motivational workshop where our speakers will, with extensive research and experience in fundraising for dance archives projects, will share strategies for communicating about your or your organization's archival work. Speakers will illuminate the most successful approaches they have found for demonstrating to funders the importance of dance archives for artists, organizations, communities, and the historical record. Attendees will walk away with resources, specific grant opportunities, concrete guidance, and new perspectives on funding archives. Thank you to Interpreter Now for providing ASL interpretation. We want to create an inclusive, supportive space for everyone. To help us achieve that, here are a few Zoom best practices. Please stay muted unless you are speaking to minimize any background noise. If you have any questions during this webinar, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be monitoring those questions and we'll do our best to answer them. If you'd like to share a thought verbally, you can also use that Q&A box or use the raise hand function. And we'll be sure to monitor that as well. This webinar is being recorded, so we will share it with registrants only for playback later. To adjust your closed captioning, navigate to the meeting controls toolbar and click the show captions icon. Immediately following the webinar, we'll ask you to fill out a very short survey. This will ensure that your idea of the dance ecosystem is accurately represented in Dance USA's programming and events. We thank you in advance for your feedback. Now I present to you Dance USA's archiving specialist, Hallie Chemetsky, and our wonderful esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Crystal. Hi, everybody. I am so glad to be here with you all. My name is Hallie Chemetsky. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in today also from unceded Lenape lands, known as the Bronx, New York today. I am, as Crystal said, Dance USA's archiving specialist. And for a brief visual description, I'm a white woman with about shoulder length brown hair, slightly longer, that's half tied up. I have some books on one side of me in my background and sort of reds and browns surrounding me. So I wanted to just give a really brief introduction to this session before I turn it over to our lovely speakers, and share with you all that this webinar is sort of part of Dance USA's ongoing work and ongoing efforts around dance archives fundings. And those efforts have really been centralized as of late in something that we're calling the Archives Funding Coalition. So this coalition is a group of Dance USA members and non-members who have been working together on strategies to sort of both educate funders and donors and other sorts of empower and fund distributors in the field about the importance of dance archives funding, as well as try to do some education for artists about how they can speak with funders, donors, et cetera, about the importance of their archives and why they feel they should be funded. This webinar being one of those methods. So the coalition has been meeting quarterly this year, and the plan is to release a suite of resources on the Dance USA website soon. So keep an eye out on Dance USA communications in the coming weeks for these resources. They include talking points for artists and arts organizations to, again, speak with funders, speak with donors, etc. They include impact stories from the field about the importance of dance archives funding and projects, and a database of potential funding opportunities that we are aware of. So please keep an eye out on Dance USA Communications, our website, and we are excited to share those with you soon. If you don't know about Dance USA's other archiving resources, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the Dance USA webpage about all of our various archiving and preservation resources and things we have available. One that I'll draw your attention to is the Artist's Legacy Toolkit, which is a free suite of resources and tools and templates and information about sort of DIY archiving for artists and companies. So definitely check that out. Check out our other resources. I'm going to, looks like I'm gonna, once I'm done speaking, I'm gonna get access to send you all that in the chat. And I also will throw my email in the chat, and just know that all of you are welcome to reach out to me anytime to talk about your archiving and preservation thoughts and questions. I will also, in a minute, put in a little brief flow of the agenda for today's call, just a brief overview. We're going to talk about prospect research and seeking out grants, grant identification and searching. And then we're going to talk about the actual grant writing, language, advice on things you can say and express in your grant applications. And then we'll have time for Q&A. You can throw your questions into the Q&A anytime, and they may be answered throughout, and they may be answered at the end. So with that, I'm really excited. I'm going to turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves and dive in, because I know they have a lot to share with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hallie and Crystal. My name is Ellen Kamoe, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a freelance archivist in the dance world, as well as a fundraising and philanthropy consultant. I am calling in from Scotland, in Edinburgh, across the pond in the UK. And for a brief image description, I am a Hapa woman with long dark hair that's right now in a messy bun. I'm wearing some silver hoop earrings and silver glasses and a black hoodie. And I will pass it to Jenai.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be with you today. My name is Jenai Cutcher. I'm the Assistant Curator in the Jerome Robbins Dance Division of the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts here at Lincoln Center, which is where I'm calling to you from, in an office that I have yet to move into, so it's still pretty sparse. I am a white woman. I have short brown hair, black rimmed glasses, and the obligatory silver hoops. And I will pass it to Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Clareson, Project Director of Performing Arts Readiness and Senior Consultant for Digital and Preservation Services at Lyrasis. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white male, brown hair, green eyes and black glasses, and a blue shirt. And I am calling in today from the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums Conference in Palm Springs, where I just saw Sharon this morning, and I'll pass the mic over to Sharon.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Sharon Burney, and I'm a program officer with CLEAR, which we commonly stands for the Council on Library and Information Resources. And I am calling in from Palm Springs, where I saw Tom this morning. I am a Black woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And today I am have my hair pulled back with a brown scarf and my locks out of my face that are rather long. And then I have on some black glasses, very thick lens, and a colorful jacket that has different colors of burgundy, brown, white, and black, and a nice African mud cloth. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. I think we'll kick it off with prospect research advice. And Sharon, if you wouldn't mind starting us off to speak about identifying needs and mission.
So we have get to see a lot of grants when I do this work, and I think it's very important for us to think about organizationally when we approach these grants, what our needs are, what are the missions of your organization, how will your projects amplify what the work that you are doing in the most profound way for grantees and funders to understand what you are, who you are, and how you do that specifically. And then when we think about our needs, how do you need support? What does that look like for you? Sometimes that looks like we have a small organization. So when we write this grant, how will we fill these spaces? You know, what will our resources? 'Cause I think sometimes when we think about resources, people don't think about staffing as resources, but that's going to be your major resource is going to be staffing. So how will you be able to maintain your organizational day-to-day outcomes and then take on a new project? I think that's something initially we should always think about first. And then if anybody would like to piggyback off of that and chime in.
I don't have anything. Sorry, Sharon, were you going to continue?
Oh, I can, but no, if anybody had anything they'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think as we start, thank you for kicking us off to sort of think about needs and to tie that into what's the day-to-day. That sort of prompts us to remember that with grant seeking, we're trying to encourage folks to think outside the box. There are traditional funders like CLEAR and the NEA, the Mellons and Knights of the world. But as federal funding comes into question and there's restriction on institutional giving in general, we want to start to think beyond those traditional arts funders or traditional cultural heritage funders. So I'm really happy to be part of this panel to share what I've learned in the social justice philanthropy world and how to tie in what we do as arts and archivists into the, as Crystal said, the historical record, the greater meaning of our work, because that is affecting both how we present ourselves and also how funders are looking at us. There are more funders who are focused on cultural preservation, like the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, for example, which is not necessarily something that if you're an individual artist, you might not think about that as being an archival resource. But as social justice funders, we get tied in, especially with community power building and cultural preservation and these things that can open up our opportunities beyond the traditional arts funding. And Tom, I think you have been operating in the space of who are these unusual suspects. Would you like to share some of your wisdom too?
Sure. I had a chance to talk about this a couple of years ago at the archiving meeting that was held in Denver by Dance USA, and I am always looking for new and different funders and really what the new trends are in funding. And One of the things I just want to put out there is we will have to monitor some of the usual suspects for changes in 2025 and beyond. And I think that makes this discussion even more important today. While we do have an opportunity to think about federal funders, a couple of organizations that we might not look at as regularly are National Endowment for the Humanities, Division of Preservation and Access, and we'll talk a little bit more about specific categories and specific grants in a few minutes. Institute of Museum and Library Services and the work that they're doing. I've seen with national foundations a number of programs supported in the past, particularly by the Mellon Foundation, including performing arts readiness, but in some ways their emphasis is changing as well. So we'll need to monitor that. And on a national and regional basis, we're just starting to work with a project of the Hewlett Foundation in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we're going to work with artists and arts organizations on disaster preparedness, archiving, succession planning, and event safety topics in a 10-county region around the San Francisco Bay Area. And I think that came about because of the Hewlett really taking a look at what the needs were in their area and what programs were available nationally. State arts agencies, certainly we work with. I think that one thing, and this actually came up in a session today, so I wanted to mention it, there may be some organizations in a hurry to spend money and spend down American Rescue Plan money before mid-January. And I just heard a session at ATOM this morning where they were talking about NEH's distribution of like $3.71 million to 118 tribal organizations from that funding. So we need to keep that in mind. And just a couple of other things I quickly mention are state historical records advisory boards. They're also called SHRABs, which is quite an interesting acronym. And they work to preserve and provide access to archival and historical society collections, but they do really have an opportunity to focus on arts organizations as well. And we're seeing that in a number of different states. And I have seen also, and have been working with one of these groups this week, community and family foundations taking an interest in arts projects to a large level. So there are a lot of types out there. And I think one of the things that we'll focus on as we go on during the rest of our session is to talk about maybe particular funders that we've worked with or that we've seen our peer organizations have good luck with and good fortune with.
Again, speaking of, CLEAR does have 2 grants that are available to archival groups. And sometimes we don't think about dance in archival way, but that is, we have funded several projects that were dance funded projects. And the 2 projects, one that we have open in January is our Recordings at Risk project. And we created that project because we were worried about climate change, gentrification, how formats are changing at the blink of an eye. So this was for audio and audio visual artifacts that are at risk of being lost because of the format types. So when you think about reel-to-reels, micro cassettes, cassette tapes, vinyl, and such, we're not going to be able to, because of staffing, sometimes because of equipment, we're not able to digitize these things. These are VHS too, when we think about those, and what story they tell and what could be lost if we don't digitize those. So we have grants up to $50,000. They're 1-year short projects where you use an external vendor to pay for that. This is to help smaller organizations who may not have the staffing or the expertise to do these things and create these projects and digitize them in-house. And so this provides you to use an external vendor and digitize those collections that are going to be most at risk. The second one we just closed last week, the initial application, just called the Digitizing Hidden Collections. And we are in talks with Mellon right now to have hopefully another round next year. This one isn't just for audio and audiovisual. This time we changed the iteration about 3 years ago because we wanted to amplify underheard voices. So these collections can be primary documents, artifacts, manuscripts, and audiovisual materials that have yet to be digitized. Those projects are 1 to 3 years. It goes up to $300,000. And we've broken it into two applications. We have a smaller initial application. We did this when we thought about smaller organizations and increasing hopefully our pool of nominated materials and organizational types, because understaffed organizations need to have a fair chance too. So you have a smaller initial application, and if you make it to the next round, then we expand on that. But not only we do that when we think about intentionality, we bring in experts to help you with the harder components of your application. So we bring in experts to do an online webinar to walk you step by step through assessing your collections, the budget, the rights, ethics, and reuse issues. And that's one of the things we're very proud of, so that we can simplify this process that sometimes can be challenging and make you feel overwhelmed, or maybe possibly not even have you apply for the grant. We want you to apply for the grant. We want you to know that you can create a competitive grant, and this is how we can help you create a competitive grant for a competitive program. So that one, we're in talks with. We hope to have another round soon, but if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll find out about it. But we're one of the unusual suspects. We had a grant from the International Association of Blacks in Dance do one of our Recordings at Risk grants a few years ago, and they partnered. Sometimes you want to partner. We'll be talking about that later. Sometimes you want to partner. They partnered with Howard's library, Morgan Spiegel's library, and that was help them because they were a one-person show at the time. So these are some of the things to think about with funding, just like Tom said, some of the unusual suspects.
And I think we'll talk more about a lot of these things in subsequent sections. My colleagues did a great job of giving an overview, broad strokes of funders to consider. I just want to add to that too, think about your content. You know, if there's a specific community that is prominent within your archive, there might be some funding opportunities along those lines as well. And speaking of content, if you're a dance company or a dance artist, you already have most likely a group of individuals, and some of them may be donors, who are already invested in the work you do. They're familiar with your history and they care about ushering it into the future. So I just want to emphasize too that in addition to grant prospecting, you already have a built-in audience who already cares about your work and thinks it's important enough to see, so probably important enough to preserve and document as well.
That's such a good point, Jenai, about the folks in our backyards or in our audiences, and it's good to remember that in addition to thinking outside the box for grant seeking, we want to think close to home, who are already invested in your work, who want to continue, who know the value of this and want to continue it. I think Tom, you did such a good job of throwing out a lot of opportunities that people might know about, and I encourage us to talk more about those. I'll run through a few just to give some new institutional or possibly individual names. And this is part of what Hallie mentioned earlier as part of the Archives Funding Coalition. We're developing a suite of resources, and we'll have a small at this point database of known funding opportunities, but one that we hope will grow with the collective wisdom in our field. And so while I've been researching for that, I've come across things like there's a microgrants organization called the Awesome Foundation. Just $1,000 for any type of project. And that seems like kind of low-hanging fruit that we're not necessarily thinking about. So there's those kind of funders. There's National Endowment for Humanities. Tom, maybe you can talk more about that. There's also, if you are in higher education, there's American Council of Learned Societies, which has funded the No Boundaries Dancing Digital project. Rebecca Salter, which I think Rebecca might be on this webinar, and Giselle Mason for their digital justice grants. And so it's something that if you are in a higher ed institution, you will already be eligible for that. Regional Arts Councils, as Tom mentioned, and I think Hallie might drop the name in for that, and Jenai has experience in Illinois with Chicago Dance History Project. There's cataloging grants available from the Wyeth Foundation of American Art. In New York City, there's the Howard Gilman Foundation, which has funded City Companies Archive. As I mentioned earlier, there's the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, which has funded Charia Bird's Dance Companies Archive. National Park Service is starting to have Save America's Treasures, and we're hoping that some of our colleagues in the field will be able to get grants from them. So we wanted to invite, throw a few out there, invite my colleagues to jump in with more names.
And I can just go a bit into and the NEH grants that you were talking about, Ellen. I think that there is a really expanding opportunity with these NEH, especially their preservation assistance grants or PAG grants. It's about up to $10,000 for preservation surveys of archival collections. And then the great thing, which I have seen many organizations do, is that once you get one of the first grant to have that type of survey done, if you have somebody come in from the outside and they say, oh, you need new storage equipment, or you need to take a look at the ways you're housing your archival and audiovisual material, there's an opportunity to go back a second time to get some of that type of equipment. I think that I've seen over the past 3 years more of these grants going to arts organizations and arts related collections than I have in many years of watching NEH. And part of that, I think, is that there's a new group of program officers at NEH who have some good, strong interest in the arts. So that is wonderful. And a number of grants are out there with components looking at digital planning and preservation planning for arts collections. There are some other things from NEH there. And I'll reiterate for just 1 second, the community foundations that I mentioned before, particularly in the Southwest. We're seeing in Texas, Arizona, Oklahoma, there are community foundations who are coming into this field and trying not only to do things for individual organizations, but trying to look at how can we help the arts environment in this city or in this metropolitan area. And one other thing too, this is another thing to mention beyond a specific type of grant, but I would always say there are grants information centers at many of the metropolitan public libraries that are out there. And that is a place where I spend some time every once in a while when I'm running out of leads. So another thing to consider. And I know Jenai has some other ideas as well that she might want to suggest.
Sure, I can. Yeah, I would also, I hate to promote outright poaching, but there are lots of other not-for-profit organizations that may or may not be dance or arts related who are getting funding for archives. It might not hurt to check out a few of them for ideas that, again, like you might not necessarily think of, that might be not only outside of Tom's box, but outside of everybody's here. again, specific to your company or your work. And again, in addition to the individual donors or funders in your own backyard. I guess I would also just add to that too, you know, we're talking a lot about fundraising and grants and donations, but let's not forget in-kind donations. Tom mentioned, you know, storage needs or technology needs. That would be another way to go. And I think in general too, sometimes, especially when I was leading a small not-for-profit digital archive, I would do, for lack of a better phrase, a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth my time? Because of course, you know, we're all doing this on our own, to, you know, spend a week or two crafting a grant proposal for $5,000 when, you know, I could make 5 or 6 phone calls and get the same thing, or I could just ask Shure if they would donate 2 lavaliers and 2 shotgun mics. So I think there, in addition to thinking about funders outside of the box, we can think about just funds outside of the box.
That's a really good point, Jenai. I think we all are aware of how much time and staff money that it takes to do this work. It's one of the reasons why social justice philanthropists are trying to lower the bar for applications by creating things like common apps through Just Fund. For example, if you are a dance archive that works for social justice, racial justice, you can register to be part of this and look for funders, and funders find you that way. If any, it's restricted to not-for-profits. So if anyone is doing that work, please get in touch. I'd love to explore that idea with you. And it also is part of what philanthropists, as you said, Tom, we're starting to see as 2024 winds down, people sort of scrambling to know how to spend down, and community foundations are a wonderful place where people will want to do that, and in a social justice funder perspective to do that, and then possibly unrestricted and multi-year way for commitments. I've seen some questions in the Q&As, a couple that are about NEH and NEA funding. So I'm going to throw those into the chat. So someone asks, if you have if you've received NEA funding, you can't get NEH funding. Do any of you know if that's accurate?
From personal experience, I got both in the same year.
Awesome. And then someone writes, more and more individual artists or ones who are retired give up their 501c3 status and aren't eligible for NEH and CLEAR. What do they need to do to become eligible?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to find. I think we glanced over, we talked a little bit about individual grants. CLEAR does not fund. It has to be a nonprofit. You have to own and hold your collections. But our hidden collections can be a collaborative project. Sometimes we see people donate their collection to an eligible local library, museum, historical society, or cultural heritage organization in their area. And then they donate their collection there. And then that person will then qualify. And then it'd be up to you to work out, you can still own and hold, own the rights to your collection, while also writing out a gift of deed, which we'll get to a little later. So that's one way to also do it, is to do it as a collaborative project with an eligible nonprofit.
Sharon, is it possible to use a fiscal sponsor for the CLEAR grants?
We do allow fiscal sponsors for CLEAR grants. Yes, we do. Yeah, we've been getting a lot more of those lately. So yes, we have acquiesced.
Great point, Jenai. I, as a co-founder of a arts organization that did not want to spend the time incorporating. Our fiscal sponsor has been an amazing resource for anyone in the San Francisco Bay Area. Intersection for the Arts has all kinds of resources, from grant writing resources, grant seeking, to space, and to tag along to what Jenai said about in-kind donations, space donations too. If you're putting on a community engagement event that has something about your dance archive from your archive, think about those as well. I think one thing that we haven't touched as much on in this section is city and state level humanities and arts councils. I seem to remember, Jenai, that you got something from Illinois. Do you want to speak to the process of that, or any other knowledge of those councils?
Sure, yeah. Well, a lot of, funding trickles down the government agencies. So those are definitely places to look into: city, state, county level, arts and humanities organization funders. I would also suggest historical societies themselves. Again, they may not be accustomed to hearing from too many dance organizations, but as I heard somebody say in our gallery the other day, oh, so dance happens right along with actual history. So you may have to do some educating, but yes, historical societies, lots of local funding options are available, private and public.
Tom, you mentioned those as well. Are you aware of new trends in regional or local arts councils?
Sure. I think looking at some of the RAOs, the regional arts organizations like South Arts, and others, Arts Midwest, that are very good at helping to find regionally specific types of funders. That's one area to consider. I also feel that there are a number of local arts agencies that I've been working with and talking to, who have actually had some of their meetings directly focused on finding funds and having people sort of give case histories of this happened in Connecticut, it happened in Nevada, and some other areas that I've worked with, talking about who have you worked with, and do you think that they might be open to another organization coming to them? So yeah, I think that at all levels, we can look at these agencies, talk with them, and try to find out what their level of interest is.
I think about 6 weeks or so ago, ATOM actually funded a project with the community archiving workshop, where they're going around the country and doing archiving workshops where they're teaching indigenous organizations and communities how to digitize their stuff. So they actually do all day seminar where they teach you hands-on how to digitize your materials. So sometimes you might want to look for skill set type of funding or free projects where there were larger organizations who are paying to teach you how to do this in-house on your own, because we always forget that resources is also staffing, right?
And I think even the discipline-specific types of organizations out there, I was really pleased to hear International Association of Blacks in Dance mentioned, because they are, besides all of the other work that they do, they're a steering committee member for Performing Arts Readiness, and they are a group that, when we talk about partnering, they have done well partnering in many areas, including archiving.
Great. Well, I wonder if this is a good time, unless anyone has anything more to say about prospect researching, if we sort of shift into grant writing, language advice. And I think, Jenai, you're going to kick us off about storytelling.
Sure, I can do that. Well, once you've determined, what kinds of funds you're seeking, whether it be, government grant or a foundation grant or talking with individual donors. The first step is to know your audience. Even though you may find different funding streams for the same project, the way you might present it to different folks will vary. So my first suggestion is to know your audience. And in terms of grants and foundations, I think that often starts with your program officer or your contact there. That's a chance not only for them to get to know you and your organization, but for you to understand a little bit more about them, what they've funded in the past, what they're looking to fund, what this particular grant opportunity is all about, and the kinds of information that they need to know. That way you can craft a compelling story. I hate to say it, but archives are not always the sexiest subject. However, all of our archives are actually just that, tools for stories to tell. They all have compelling stories. You let your material help you craft that narrative for your grant application or for your appeal. Look for things that will resonate with your audience and connect. And when I wrote them, I was just dealing with dance artists of all kinds and all generations, and I still haven't met a boring dance artist. So yeah, see Sharon shaking her head, no. Especially,
The archives are sexy. Stop that. The archives are very sexy.
To you they are, yes. To you they are for sure. But Sharon's a great example too. She mentioned earlier that CLEAR hadn't been granting a lot of dance organizations. So there you go right there. It's more about making a case depending on the background of the funding agency or the program officer, even the parks and the treasures grants or conservation agencies. I mean, you have your argument ready. You can make an argument, even if it's not like a very straightforward line, and you do that through the archives themselves and the stories that they're already telling you.
That's beautifully said. Our work is to tell stories through the archives that we have and through the art that we're putting out there in dance as well. To that note, I actually was wondering, I think we can see the chat now, and or maybe we can't. Maybe it's for everyone. I was going to ask if, okay, Hallie, if you can throw in the chat whether we can see everyone or not, and then I'll tag along with that. But one thing that I would say is, in terms of telling stories through dance and through archives, my personal story in this field starts with hula, as I learned as a young person. It's a form of art that's for cultural preservation, that is about my community, my heritage, my folklore. It's about resistance. And those are all things that we can that I learned about the art form that I was learning early, that is sort of an embodiment of archiving. And art moves us, right? It's a tool for community building, for cultural preservation. And so I'm not sure if we could see everyone in the chat. What I was going to ask is if we could just sort of harness the collective power and the collective wisdom of this group by throwing out reasons that archives matter and dance matters. So if we can do that, please do. If not, we'll keep sharing our own. And so one thing I wanted to highlight, which I think we can send afterwards, is a resource that came out of the Chorus Foundation, which just sunsetted, and it was a climate-focused foundation. But they wrote this beautiful case argument for the way that arts builds community and builds community power. And that is something that connects with all kinds of funders and people in general. And so it's a type of argument you might use, the power of arts to be able to, to benefit from funding and to share your own story. Also, the preventing the loss of the historical record. We've touched on that many times, but that's something that is important to include in the storytelling, in addition to all the nitty-gritty of your budgets and your digitization needs to have that story ready. And I'll say one more before I pass it to my colleagues, but just the importance of dance and of arts in general, of offering joy and hope. And that's something that we all need in this moment more. And I think being able to connect the story of what the day-to-day needs are for your organization or your dance company or your individual art, it is so important that we remember what art and dance brings us, and to offer that up to yourselves, to your community, and to potential funders. Or anybody else to come in, but I think Tom was going to talk about greater public access and engagement as well.
Sure. And this may be something where Sharon has had a number of good points on what Claire is doing and what other people in the community are doing. So I might invite her in after I make a couple of comments here. But I think the idea of including greater access as part of your digitization grant, your digitization project, is really important. And this can be activities including the digitization of the materials themselves, whether you're doing it or an external organization is doing it. I think something that we rarely budget time for and rarely budget in grants for is the archival description and metadata. And I know that that's something that Claire really pays close attention to. Making materials available by a website or a content management system. Is that something that you can wrap into a proposal? Online exhibit development to show off what you have digitized. And something that I just started working on in a project, and a couple of people from Lyrasis are working on this, curriculum development related to materials that have been digitized, and how can those be used in the curriculum. And I think that expanding access, when we were talking about this topic, when the panel met beforehand, I think it can get more eyes on your materials. First of all, it can lead to a greater chance of funding in the future. And it can tie back to some of the things Jenai has been talking about, where this could be individual donors or granting organizations as well. It really is something where you can get greater access and get this out to the public. And then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, there may be some funders that come and say, well, we really like what you've done in this program, and can you expand it? So I know that, Sharon, Jenai may have some other things to say on this topic for sure.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. What we see, some of our outreach components that we see have been very fascinating. I think presenting at conferences is one thing you can do once you've digitized your projects. When you think about that, one of the most unique ones we funded was during, I think it was, don't get me wrong, I think it was UCLA, University of California did a prison pandemic project in which they took the phone calls and letters, because during the pandemic, families couldn't go see their imprisoned family members. And so they had to come up with these unique ways to interact with them. And also, so they did a project in which they did that, but then they moved it into a social justice type of platform where they used it to advocate for imprisoned people, incarcerated people. And so that's something that you can think about, especially, what's happening now with the threat of losing arts, is how do I take this archive and move it and make it speak for me? When we talk about an archive, we are talking about history that's saying, tell my story, tell my story. you know? So how do you tell that story in a compelling way? How do you then take that and make it accessible to the public? How do we learn from what we did in the past and move it to the forward? How is what's important about these gaps? How can you, let's think about these unique ways that we can use outreach to move society forward. That would be my suggestion there.
And I do think it's important to, get realistic about your archival needs and uses. Specifically dance-related archives function, serve artistic functions, PR and marketing, fundraising, education, right? So think about how you want to use your archives to further your work. And these can be generative projects, like Tom said as well, and Sharon. So what work will come out of using particular archival items in one way or another? I think that would help even perhaps whittle down what exactly you need funding for and from whom to ask. Another thing that we haven't quite touched on yet is if, these archives are in use in your daily practice, what are the forms that you need versus what are the forms that you want to, preserve? Archives also serve the purpose of longevity and posterity. MP4s would probably do if you need a reference video to restage a work, right? So getting realistic about your archival needs and resource and uses will help you determine what resources you need at what time.
Also a good reminder to, if you are part of a company or an organization, to think about the other, to not continue to silo archivists in our little offices, but to think about who are the educators and the outreach oriented folks within your team, or that you can partner with potentially outside of your institution or organization or group. I think outreach, but Tom, I loved how you brought up curriculum building. That's something that the Ailey Archive has done through a Portrait of Ailey project that is now part on PBS. They're developing a curriculum that goes out to school kids. And so anything that it's a promotion for the archive, it's also just community engagement. And that's something that funders want to see. How are we engaging with each other? Sharon, as you said, like, how are the outreach can move, I love how you said this, can move society forward. And that's so important for us to remember, to hold as we're doing this work, and also to present. I think we can maybe also talk a little bit about partnerships. I think, Tom, you are willing to take the lead on that as we continue our discussion.
Sure. I think looking at a number of ways that you can partner, and we've already heard great examples throughout the discussion, but partnering with libraries, archives, museums, other nonprofit cultural institutions, the idea of collaboration over the past 10 to 15 years has become a big buzzword. But it's actually a buzzword with some legs. It hasn't, sort of gone off it hasn't jumped the shark. So it's something that I think we should definitely continue to look at. And it also has become a new category of funding for some funders. The Institute of Museum and Library Services certainly has had a number of new programs. We had the chair of Shelley Lowe, the chair of NEH, speaking at ATOM this morning, and she was talking about several new categories that are coming out through NEH that are going to be looking at things based on collaborative activity. And we see this in local and state collaboration with digital projects, although it is changing a bit of time over time. The Digital Public Library of America and its state and regional hubs is a collaborative project where we can include dance and we can include the arts and we can sort of help to promote that a little bit more. I think the other things that I wanted to mention here is some statewide institutions that excel at matchmaking organizations together with projects that might be between a couple of different organizations, and matchmaking potential groups and partnership projects with funders. And I just, one of the best, I have to just have people take a look at this because I think they do so well. The Indiana Historical Society has a track record that is many years, that's a known entity for being the matchmaker. And one other that I have just had some recent exposure to at their annual conference is the American Association for State and Local History, also known as AASLH. They are wonderful at building state and regional partnerships. Particularly, they've got efforts like their America 250 project that they're really focusing a lot of their efforts on. And this might be a way to say, okay, arts played a whole very important role in the development of America and in our, previous 250 and our next 250. So let's think about that.
I do think that, especially now, lots of funding agencies are looking for collaborative endeavors specifically, and seem to get excited when they hear of examples of multiple organizations consolidating efforts. I think that is just a reality as well too. I'm just going to mention one like super literal nuts and bolts example. If you are digitizing a lot of forms of media, those costs go down if it's a bulk project. So perhaps you only have, I don't know, 40 VHS tapes you need to digitize, but what about 6 of your peers? Can you collect them all together and get a bulk digitization rate?
That's a wonderful tip, and something that actually I see addressed in the Q&A. There is a question about floppy disks and 8mm disks to view before investing money in the digitizing material. Some of it's up to 35 years old. Is that the type of thing that there might be opportunities to collab or to get with other groups and then have a bulk discount for that kind of thing?
I would probably not be the person to answer the specifics on the technology, but just thinking in terms of funding, if there's one grant that can cover, digitization for a handful of artists or companies, that might be another way to get creative about funding your archival projects, for example. Yeah, I am not the person to ask about floppy disks.
That's okay. It's also a good reminder that you can share the work of having to apply or call or make these funding asks together. It's really hard to do this alone, and that's why it's good that we have our affinity group for dance archivists, which if you're not already part of, please ask Hallie how to become part of it and to join us, as well as for our archiving funding coalition. That is an example in of itself of the way that we're trying in this field to collaborate together, and it's wonderful to be reminded of those. And Tom, thank you for so many specific examples. Sharon, with CLEAR, do you work with, or how do you look upon collaboration? What advice might you give to someone who is looking to collaborate?
Yeah, so our hidden collections allows collaborative projects. Our Recordings at Risk doesn't. Official collaborating organizations, right? But we do our review. We use an independent review panel, and they really like to see how far we can stretch this out. What is the broadest impact that we can make geographically? They want you to show that your materials that you're nominating to be digitized, how will they affect future scholars? down the road, how will your collections impact the community, not just locally, but in a broader context of geographical context. And so that it works well. Sometimes it's doing what we just talked about. It's like it's a group of dance organizations saying, oh, we all have like Jameson's tapes and we all put them together and we work as a collaborative project to digitize it for a broader impact, to look at maybe how this person impacted society locally in these different ways. And we think about Mary McLeod Bethune and her expansive reach. And then, not only did she affect education, but Black women organizations, she was in the White House. What is this global impact that she made? So you might work with a museum in Daytona Beach, but you might also work with the Library of Congress. So, I think thinking about these outside collaborative, we once had a project that was like 26 collaborating newspaper projects, 26 collaborating organizations. It was a lot of fun to organize, but sometimes that works better when you have a smaller staff. So now you're not just one sole small entity working on a project. You're now a part of a broader community that's working together collaborative, and everybody has a different expertise that they can bring to the project that can make this a more profound and impactful project. We love to see collaborative projects, and they don't have to always be official. They can be non-official, but we're going to help with our expertise. So you might not have an archivist, but somebody locally might have an archivist on hand that's an expert in this. You might have a digitization specialist that we're going to, as a cost serve, we're going to do our best to work with you here to help you with these. So think outside of the box. I think sometimes we look at a grant and we just think narrowly, but I definitely implore you to think outside the box.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, it's also to remind us what we said about fiscal sponsorship, or whether or not we're C3. The more that we collaborate, the more avenues that open for us for funding sources. So that's another excellent reason. One thing I wanted to add about collaboration and knowing sort of your individual strengths within funding seeking is there's a very simple quiz to find your asking style that I've used in community grant making in the past. And I think, it doesn't necessarily prepare you for like a strict NEH grant, but it does give you the benefit of learning what you're good at and where you're, it's sort of like a personality quiz that just helps you to identify where your strengths are and who you might ask to either collaborate or to give you assistance as you're seeking funding. I found it to be very useful in all kinds of contexts. I think one thing we haven't yet touched on is some nitty-gritty parts. Sharon, you had mentioned in our prep session, you were going to talk about knowing your collection and also any advice you'd give for folks developing their budgets.
Yeah. So knowing your collection, that can be very difficult. Before you even think about starting a digitization project, you need to know, what am I digitizing? What kind of shape is it in? Have I done any assessing of the collection at all? Have I opened up those boxes? Have I looked at it? Have I tried to look at some of what's on this reel and have an idea? Has it been assessed at all? I implore you to try to do at least the bare minimums on assessing. Will you know every single thing that's going on in that? No, you won't. No, and that's okay. We have projects all the time. They get in there and they think that they may have had duplicates that they didn't realize they had duplicates of, or they may have find that they had much more than what they thought. And we're okay with that because we just say do a modification request. And if you have money left to add more, or you might end up having more money because it wasn't as in bad a shape as you thought. Is there any mold on there? Is there remediation that you might need to do to prepare it? We do allow in our grants for you to do some remediation care to get it ready and prepared for that. So look at it. Is it moldy? Identify what might be the issues with it. Being able to explain that in your grant that we have assessed the collections, we think it's approximately. Sometimes you will know we have 200 cassette tapes and we know what's on these. And sometimes you may say, we're going to do it in linear feet. And we're going to say we have this amount of, that's an easier way to do that because when you really don't know specifically what's on there, but we think we have this. Because what our reviewers are going to look and see is then what you attach to that. Because if you go in and you say, I have 40 tapes and then you want $50,000 and then you don't know what's on that, our reviewers are going to be like, well, they don't even know what they have. So how are they coming up with this price point for digitization services? So the first step is to get in there, look at it, take pictures of what you have. We ask for samples that our reviewers can look at and see the boxes and see the tapes and see those. And we'll ask you for sample images of what's in there. Dig in there, get a little dirty with your gloves on. But get in there and check and see what you have, and then make a collections list to the best of your ability that identifies what this is, what material and format it's on, and then how many we have, or how long, or how many feet, or 90 minutes, or 120 minutes of a VHS, or 90 minutes of a cassette tape, or reel to reel, we think is X linear feet. And that's, and this collection is connected in what way? And then identify that to the best of because we're going to ask you for a collections list. We're going to see if you know what's going on or have an idea what's going on in that collection. I think these are important things to think about as you're assessing that, you're documenting it, and then attaching that to your digitization project. That will let you know then how much I need to spend on remediation. How much, and then when you get your vendor quotes, if you're going to use an outside vendor, you know what kind of price point you're going to be looking at. They'll be able to tell you, well, we need to do this amount of work to get it. We know what's on here. If there are duplicates, what's our contingency plan if things go awry, because it could be in worse shape than you thought, or there could be a lot of blank stuff there and you might have more space. Then you'll be able to now shop around for the digitization vendor that's best for you, because sometimes it's not the local person. Sometimes it might be somebody who specializes in reel-to-reel, or specializes in vinyls, or who are specialized in these different, and then that way you can pick the best person suitable for your particular project. Or if you have the equipment, that you might have the equipment you already need, or you might want to use some of your budget for equipment and supplies to buy something to help you digitize what you have the most of in your collections. And now you can do it in-house, or you can include a salary. I talked about this. I was on a panel a few weeks ago at the HBCU Library Alliance, and somebody asked the question, how do I get my library dean, the dean's administration and where I work to get me more lines, or you can use a grant to say, okay, I'm going to hire a part-time archivist, or I'm going to hire some tech specialists, and then do a 1 to 2 year, write that line in, and then bring that person and advocate and say, look what we were able to do for the digitization project and the outreach, and connected to what we talked about earlier, right? With the funders, we were able to bring in additional funders because of this. And therefore you should pay for this line permanently in our library, in our archive, in our museum, etc. Use it to advocate to go forward. That's another way you can use your budget. We go back and do site visits of people that we funded before, and they were able to take the grant that they got there and then get 2 other bigger grants, and then they brought on interns who then finished school and now work at their library. So these are things that we can think about when we're thinking about budget. I always like to start with staff because I love to work with smaller organizations and watch them grow. And so staffing is very important. If you can write that into your grant, write it into your grant. Write it in as a temporary. If you don't have who you need there, then you can say, I'm going to add this job description and we're going to try to hire. But always make sure that you're giving an equitable wage for where you live. because that's something reviewers will ding you on. Why are you not paying them when we looked up with the equitable living wages that in that particular area? Make sure that you're doing that so you don't get dinged on that end. If you need equipment and you know you already have archivists in there or there's people that do that, I made them go up because when I first came to work here, I think we were only allowing $7,500 for equipment. Then I boost them up to 10, and now it's at 15 because it's post-pandemic prices, right? And so if you know you need a, a huge scanner, flatbed scanner, put that in that application because you're going to use it later down the road. So these are the things I encourage you to do when you think about that. When you're thinking about time, what's the FTE? If you want to write your salary and I'm looking at this project, okay, 25% of my time is going to be devoted to this, then you look at your annual salary, you took 25% of what that is, and this is how much I'm going to get paid off the grant for this so that my other work doesn't fall off kilter, and your deans or directors or whatever would be like, oh, okay, well, they're going to pay this part. Okay, I'll do it that way. We also allow fringe benefits, so these are things you want to think about when you're making a budget that makes sense based on what you wrote. What you wrote in a grant, how many things you're going to digitize, what you're going to do, does it make logical sense? It's the same way like when you go to a grocery store. Right? Use that same logic to make sense of your budget.
Thank you, Sharon. I think we're going to turn to Q&A, but I wanted to invite Jenai. I think we forgot to touch more on individual donors. You introduced it in our first section. Do you want to say more about that?
I don't know what I had prepared to say, but I'm thinking now about something else that I suppose I'll say that ties into a few things we've got floating around here. I think there are also, there's a big difference between using your archives in everyday practice and having, be necessary to refer to things, put things out there on your own as a working artist of some kind. And then there's, thinking about giving your archive to a repository, which is another collaboration of sorts, a library, an institution of some sort. I'm going to meander for just a second here. So fundraising is different in those two regards as well. And I guess I just want to say now, as somebody who represents an institution, repositories will take your archive in any state at any level. But if you want your materials to be as widely accessible as possible and to have the greatest impact, what would be most important is the layers of information that you're able to provide that institution with your archive. So I promise I'll bring it back to individual donors. The more that you can identify individuals, provide context for your materials, the more accessible those items will be once they go to a repository. And that's another way to think about the individuals in your sphere, whether it be company alumni or longtime super fans or anybody who might be willing to donate their time and expertise to helping you provide those layers of information to your archive. That was not where I was headed, and I hope it doesn't even undercut our whole discussion on fundraising. But I do want to make it clear that if you are looking to donate your archive to an institution, there's work that they will be doing that you might not have to worry about as much, but what would be most helpful is the informational aspect.
And those repositories, particularly if they're, say, a university or library, will have their own funding sources that you can then. I am a fan of poaching from donor honor roll lists, so I think that's a good place to go to tie back to what you said earlier, Jenai. Maybe I'm taking a look at some of the questions in the Q&A. So one person asked about sharing our names and emails, and I think Hallie will send those out after the session. Also, just want to say Hallie is an excellent resource for all of this. So if we don't address one of your questions, please just reach out to her. She knows how to contact us if collaboration is good, or she will just have all of the answers. So someone asks about lack of in-house archiving expertise and advisory councils in order to guide their work plan. Is that the best way to utilize people with archiving expertise? Are there other options? And I think we can easily see how that might tie into funding. You know, advisory councils are wonderful way to show that you're collaborating with others as you seek your own funding sources. But do my colleagues have more to say about those?
Yeah, we see advisory councils all the time in our applications, and our reviewers look very favorably when they see that not only you're creating the advisory council to help you with this project, but also that you're paying them honorariums for their expertise, and that you don't just, you know, don't take it. Sometimes it's subject specific expertise. Also have lack of an in-house archiving expertise. Like I said earlier, if you're able to write in salaries for that, or even professional consulting services or whatever, sometimes you can slide them in that way. Well, they're providing services, so therefore we can write them into the grant. That's a great way to do it. And it's also a great way to advocate that we do need an in-house archivist, right? By starting with the grant.
And I would jump in on this and say, particularly those preservation assistance grants from National Endowment for the Humanities, we have people who we talk with all the time, and they say, oh, we know our collection, but we don't have the expertise on how to preserve it. You know, and that's when conservators, preservation organizations can come in and really help. And I also do agree. Advisory councils and advisory groups are wonderful in a lot of ways, because they'll help spread the web and help you think of other ways to fund things. I'm working with a really great one on the succession planning project that we're doing with the Conservation Center in Philadelphia. And they have got us going on so many more different directions than we ever thought about at the beginning of this project, that I am just want to put an emphasis on that for sure.
That also made me think about other ways to tie in folks who are in this field or entering this field, just through MILS programs. You know, I started my dance archiving career through being in an MLS program, where there are capstone projects, there's directed field work. You can connect with those institutions to hopefully get someone who can volunteer or intern or help with their existing and growing expertise. But if your dance company or organization doesn't have it, that's a wonderful place to look for someone like that. And I could certainly connect folks with my alma mater at University of Washington if that's of interest. There's a great question here, and I don't know the answer. How many dance organizations get a grant on the first try?
I'm just going to speak for Claire. As a program officer, well, one, it's a very competitive grant. However, as a program officer, we have been so diligent about the resources that we put on the page. And I'm going to say, read the guidelines. We work so hard on those guidelines that if you do and follow that guideline step by step and answer every question in that guideline, I promise you will have a competitive grant. Secondly, tell the compelling story. We talked about that earlier. You want to wow the reviewers. You want the reviewers to read the story, the project narrative of your thing, and be like, wow, this must be digitized, and this is why. And this is the geographical and regional scope. of this archive. And this is how it moves society. This is how scholars are going to seek out this material, and they want to read about it because it's going to impact the field in these ways. I think if you do that, if you use the resources that whoever you're, not just us, whoever you're applying, go to the webinars. Go to the webinars, let them see your face if you can. If you can't go to the webinar when it's happening, go back and look at the recording if they put it online. Use all of the frequently asked question documents that we put on. We put a transcript on ours. I mean, utilize all of the resources that they give you. Email them and ask any questions about anything you have a question about on that. We spend so many times answering questions for people, and we don't mind. So we love to see great applications when they come in. But I promise you, our number one biggest pet peeve is that you couldn't have possibly have read the guidelines because, read the guidelines, please.
That's a great point, Sharon, and thank you for sharing so much of your expertise. There's also a question about in the Q&A about copyright, which I know is something Clear addresses all the time. So how big of an issue / concern has copyright played in archiving live performances and making them accessible to the public? This person works for a dance company, often performs with an orchestra with strict union agreements. This is something you probably all address, but Allie and Sharon, I'm thinking especially of you two.
Yeah, so our requirement is that you make the metadata publicly available. We have 2 intellectual property experts that are on every review panel, and they read every single application and give us any concerns they may have for rights, ethics, and reuse. Sometimes it is difficult depending. However, especially because we've changed the iteration of our amplifying unheard voices. So some of that you can't make publicly available for religious reasons, because when we talk about indigenous communities, sensitivity, especially now as we start to, talk about certain things, and that's okay. If you can explain why you cannot make these publicly available, or if you have a gift of deed, maybe that this particular artist has gifted it to your organization and you have a gift of deed and they say you can use it in this ways, or if you're going to put a fees on it, explain what those fees are in your in your rights, ethics, and reuse section of the application. There is a fee scale. Here's what the fee scale looks like. You can review it, but you can't download it, or you can use it, but you can't publicly use it, or you can't share it in these ways, but you can view it, or you can view it if you come in and pay a fee, or if you're a member of this museum. Explain all of that carefully in the rights, ethics, and reuse section of it. And if we know that, yes, our IP will say, hey, yes, they understand what the restrictions are. They understand what the rights are to these. They have gifts of deeds. They're unsure about this portion of the collection, but this portion is open. If there's only a section of your collection that you have restrictions on, explain what that section is, how many of it, and what is publicly available. And then if you have a takedown, say you're unsure about those, now we have a takedown policy that we have to handle these things when they come up. It's how much you explain, how well you know. That's why we say you need to assess and know your collections. Do you have gift of deeds? Do you not? Explain it thoroughly in your rights, ethics, and reuse. And typically we're okay with those.
We are almost out of time, and I will pass it back to Crystal in a second to wrap us up. But hi again, it's Hallie, I'm back. Thank you all so much for your expertise. I just wanted to offer a little bit more context on copyright because I spend a lot of time talking with artists about copyright. And some of this will sort of reiterate what Sharon said, but maybe for different audiences. One thing that artists don't always know that archivists and archives do is that archives have a right under copyright law to preserve material regardless of if they have the copyright to it or not. So that's one thing to know. Sharing it, like you asked in your question in the Q&A, that's a different matter. Publicly sharing, there are, different, as you know, levels of copyright that may allow you to share more or less. But as what Sharon was saying about knowing parts of your collection, if you know that there are some materials that have this union orchestra and you're not going to be able to publicly share them, that doesn't mean they can't be in your archive for internal use and for, you know, preservation, and that you might be able to provide access to them to your team and maybe your dancers or a collaborator. That is protected under copyright law. It's the putting them on the internet or making them widely available that might bring issues. Also, I like to encourage artists to think about, you know, a union orchestra might be a little bit different because they're going to, you know, have those strict rules regardless. But a lot of artists have materials with music or costume design or other intellectual property that's, you know, on stage in the show that they don't have good documentation for. You can always go back to your collaborators and get those contracts retroactively. Contracts are like that. Once you have a signed piece of paper, it applies. So if you find that, you know, when you're writing your grant application, there's a huge amount of materials that you want to share, but you can't quite yet, think about how you might go back through those relationships and get some retroactive agreements. Like I've been saying to a lot of people in the Q&A, feel free to email me if you want to talk more about copyright or any of these issues. I do spend a lot of time talking with artists about copyright. So with that, huge thank you from me personally to the speakers. I know Crystal will thank you again, but I want to say thank you to all the speakers and the audience myself, because I'm very appreciative. And thank you everybody for being here and listening and asking your great questions. So I will pass back to Crystal.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that thank you. There was a lot of great information shared, and I hope that everyone watching feels a little bit more confident to get their archives projects funded. And we definitely want to hear about the impact of this webinar and how your archiving, or how funding your archives project is going. So definitely keep up with us, and please fill out the feedback survey that I have dropped in the chat. We want to continue presenting relevant conversations and that really help you and ground you in the dance ecosystem. So we want to hear from you. So please take a moment. It's a really quick survey to just fill that out to give us some feedback. Thank you again to our esteemed panelists, to Interpreter Now for ASL interpretation. Thank you all for hanging out with us, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Goodbye. Thanks, everyone.